This is Andrew S., The Irresistible Disgrace, and this is Self-inflicted Theological Wounds. Earlier this summer, Loyd Ericson and Blair G. Van Dyke released the second volume in the Perspectives on Mormon Theology series. This one was about apologetics. The volume features essays by authors all over the map in terms of position on Mormon apologetics. Loyd and Blair let the authors speak for themselves. But if you're familiar with the existing dynamics, you can definitely understand that some essays are responding to other essays. The typical meta-arguments about apologetics have been hashed out too many times already, but I wanted to focus on Loyd's own contribution to the volume, an essay entitled Conceptual Confusion and Building of Stumbling Blocks of Faith. Loyd went on a joint Mormon Matters, Mormon Stories podcast episode with Dan Wotherspoon, John Dehlin, and Bert Fuller to discuss his concept. And I have written more extensively about his notion at Wheat and Tares, so I won't dive too deeply into his argument. However, to summarize, Loyd believes that attempts to utilize secular scholarship to defend religious claims actually opens up those religious claims to defeat by secular scholarship. That is to say, faith crises spurred by doubt in the historicity of the Book of Mormon could only happen because apologists and critics were both confused that the truth of the Book of Mormon was tied to the historicity or ancient nature of the book. I was intrigued by Loyd's thesis, but also somewhat doubtful. As I wrote in several comments on Facebook and on the Mormon Matters podcast page, I thought the main issue Loyd would run into is that he's already too late. Many believers do believe that secular scholarly claims are tied to their religious claims, and even worse, it's not just apologists who cause this. Rather, the church hierarchy itself teaches members to believe that its truth claims extend to claims regarding secular facts. It's clear in Moroni 10 that Moroni isn't asking people to pray about the historicity of the book. That's where Loyd's argument has grand merit. Moroni explicitly states in verse 6, "And whatsoever thing is good is just and true. Wherefore, nothing that is good denieth the Christ, but acknowledges that he is." Please note that this says whatsoever thing is good is just and true. One looks to goodness first as the criteria of truth. And furthermore, there's nothing in this line to suggest that true implies our modern understanding of historical facts, but rather about acceptance of theological claims. As Loyd summarizes D.C. Phillips in his essay, to proclaim that Jesus is the Christ is a categorically different thing than saying Jesus is a carpenter. And yet, notwithstanding these concepts from the Book of Mormon, or, for example, the Alma 32 concept that you verify the goodness of the word by experimenting upon it, not by validating its historicity, there is at the same time an emphasis from the church itself that historicity matters. I posted my Wheat and Tares post on the ex-Mormon Reddit to see what people would think, and most people adamantly protested the idea that Mormonism could be true if it were not historical. To avoid the potential of having a biased audience, perhaps ex-Mormons tended to have had more literalistic faith than typical, I asked the more believing Latter-day Saints Reddit, and although there were some who responded that their testimony did not depend on the historicity of the Book of Mormon, others expressed that it did. As the most upvoted comment in that thread wrote, "Joseph didn't leave the inspired fiction option open to us. He spoke of an actual visit from Moroni. He claimed to have dug up a real, tangible set of ancient plates. He said that they had actual reformed Egyptian characters on them. He claimed to have translated them with an actual seer stone that the church still possesses to this day." I know that for more nuanced Mormons, it will be easy to say that Joseph may not have fully understood his own experiences, and therefore could have misreported what was happening. However, at that point, and as I remarked about Loyd's argument in the first place, one has to essentially argue against members' understanding of how the church itself presents its own nature, to try to preserve faith in said church. The church's emphasis on literal historicity is therefore a self-inflicted theological wound. This has been Andrew S., The Irresistible Disgrace.